Stay tuned. Our meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. The open house meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. The Kino to DeMoss-Petrie transmission line project open house meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. Our meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. The open house meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. The Kino to DeMoss-Petrie transmission line project open house meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. Our meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. The open house meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. The Kino to DeMoss-Petrie transmission line project open house meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. Our meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. The open house meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. The Kino to DeMoss-Petrie transmission line project open house meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. Our meeting will begin shortly. Stay tuned. The open house meeting will begin shortly.
Good evening. I'm Eric Roth and Ed Beck. We'd like to welcome you to the live stream open house for the Kino to DeMoss-Petrie 138 kV transmission line project. Hopefully everyone has settled in and is participating from their favorite chair. This is the second live stream event we've held on behalf of this project. The last time we were able to meet in person was in October 2019. Since then, the pandemic has forced us to issue materials virtually, and we've issued a project update on the website, and we've held several online meetings on behalf of the project. Just to note, the project materials are available on the project website, both the PowerPoint as well as some additional materials. In addition to that, we do have some of the materials presented in Spanish. On the project website, there is a link, Espanol. If you click that, the project website is mirrored in Spanish. Just to note, the ultimate outcome of the meeting this evening is to present you with the Phase 3 analysis and the routes that we are bringing forth for consideration and comment from the public. To note, this meeting has been scheduled from 6 to 8 p.m. and can be extended slightly to make every attempt to answer all of the questions. In addition, this project is being recorded, just to note, and once it has been finalized, we'll try and upload it within the next several days to the project website. So I'd like to kind of recap why we are here today. This project is very important to Tucson Electric Power to be able to continue to provide safe, reliable power. As a provider of critical service, TEP is vigilant about potential public health threats. Tucson Electric Power is taking proactive steps to support public health and ensure the safety of its employees and public alike. TEP must continue moving forward with this project to ensure the continued availability of safe, reliable power now and in the future. Shown on the slide, this project is needed in service by 2023 to meet TEP's long-term planning goals, and this project has been identified as far back in studies as 2008, or the need for a project similar to this has been identified in studies as far back as 2008. TEP is making efforts to continue the public outreach process to ensure the project's continued success while also ensuring the health and safety of the public and its employees. So we do have an agenda prepared. If you've downloaded the presentation from the project website, this will help you follow along. We've got it scattered throughout as well to show you where we are throughout the presentation. But a brief overview of the topics to be discussed tonight. We'll be going over the question submission process again, introductions, and what we learned from the first live stream event. We'll also be going over the purpose and need of the project benefits, and finally we'll be presenting the Phase 3 analysis, as well as the routes that we would be bringing forward to the public. So just to note, there are two ways in which you can ask questions during the presentation. You can call and speak to a person directly. We have bilingual operators available to answer questions. So you can also text message your question, and we are unable to have people speak directly on air, unfortunately, but hopefully this form of... So, line sighting team introductions. My name is Eric Rotz. I'm the Manager of Operations Planning. As the Manager of Operations Planning, I'm responsible for ensuring the study of the transmission system in the day-to-day time frame. Also, as part of this position, I'm part of the line sighting team responsible for the preparation of the CEC application. My role in this capacity, I help with the purpose and need and technical aspects that go into the application. And Renee?
Good evening, I'm Renee Darling. I'm a supervisor in our Land Resources Department, and I am responsible for overseeing the resource studies that go into the analysis of alternative
company. I am now acting in a support role for line sighting for this project, and I'm here to assist in response to any questions that might come up for the project.
All right, thank you guys. And on to the next slide. And just one thing to note, this is a live demonstration presentation we're doing right now, so there is a possibility that we could experience some technical difficulties. And just to note again, this is the Kino to DeMoss-Petrie 138 kV transmission line live stream open house. We do have several ways in which to ask questions. The numbers have been provided at the bottom of the screen. So just wanted to recap the first live stream event that was held on behalf of this project. Was held on August 13th in place of an in-person meeting that was scheduled for March. We learned a lot from this, as this was our first live stream event held on behalf of any project. Some of the things that have changed from that event to this event, we will not be having a question and answer period scattered throughout. Rather, we are asking that you submit your questions as we present the material, and we will be responding to the questions at the end of the presentation. Another thing that has changed is that we will be having a 5-minute or so break midway through, so at about the hour mark to get up and be able to stretch and walk around. So another thing, the first live stream event was well attended. We did have up to 78 people attend at the peak of attendance. We've received and responded to up to approximately 700 questions. Renee will be speaking, covering the comments and questions received to date a little more in detail later in the presentation. A lot of the comments and questions that we have received are in regards to the possible undergrounding of the transmission line, which leads to the next slide. To date, we have received over 230 comments related to the undergrounding of the transmission line. This has inspired us to continue to investigate all of the comments and questions that have been brought to our attention and continue to refine the undergrounding cost estimates prepared as part of this investigation. TEP is continuing to research the feasibility of undergrounding of this transmission line in this urban environment. There could be potentially a lot of conflicts with existing utilities. And TEP continues to research also the electrical characteristics as well. The undergrounding of the transmission line has different electrical properties than overhead, and it could have a negative impact on the overall result of what we're trying to achieve with this project. But we're trying to get a better understanding of what undergrounding of the transmission line, what impact that will have on the electrical characteristics. TEP has asked the consultant that has prepared the original undergrounding cost estimate to revise this cost estimate and to exclude the jack and bore option at the major intersections and rather include it as trenching. This has had the effect of estimated cost from 11 million per mile down to approximately 9.9 million per mile. Granted, this is, and that does include a 20% contingency. The updated report has been placed on the project web page under the studies accordion, and it has been titled as Revision 1. Through our research to date, we have found that there are wide ranges in cost estimates for undergrounding, depending on site conditions and the complexity of the project. TEP continues to analyze the site conditions along the proposed routes of these projects that have been brought to our attention in Arizona and other states. TEP strives to keep rates as low as possible while continuing to provide safe, reliable power, and should not ask customers outside of this study area to bear the cost burden for undergrounding this project. If residents and other impacted parties within the study area would like to create an undergrounding district to explore other funding options, TEP will work with the city to create an undergrounding district and will do everything it can to help analyze and secure options in creating this district. We're continuing to research what options might be available to help with the funding of this. TEP is committed to working with the impacted neighborhoods in a transparent way to successfully move forward with this project. As such, at this point, TEP will be moving forward with a minimum of 3 overhead options in the CEC application. I'd like to recap the purpose and need of the project. As we can see here, in 2008, studies determined new facilities would be needed within the project area to meet future energy demands. What we've got here shown on the map are work orders shown involving a service upgrade. All the work orders shown were a direct result of a service upgrade to a residence or a commercial property or a new installation. None of the service requests shown are related to a solar installation or like replacement. So what this means is that all of the dots represented on the map had to have some type of upgrade to the service as a direct result of an increase in energy demand. This is not representative of the whole study area, just a sample set just to demonstrate that energy demand has increased throughout the entire study area. The number of dots shown on the map are in the range of 1,600 just for this small sample set. So expanding on the purpose and need, there are, if we look at the chart, using 35th Street as an example, we can see that the current transformer rating is at 71%. The current circuit rating is at 81%. And the contingency rating is at 151 transformer. What this means is that if we lose a piece of equipment within the substation serving the load, that the remaining piece of equipment, in this case the transformer, overloads to 151% of its available capacity. So as you can see here on this slide, there are several pieces of equipment or circuits that are overloaded within this study area. The map shows the service territory for each substation. The stars represent our 138 kV substations, and the red circles represent our 46 kV substations. The purpose and need. The UA North substation will alleviate demand placed on existing 46 kV circuits, providing contingency support and unloading some of the 46 kV circuits within the area. In addition, this project will remove the radial load that is, or the radial nature of the 46 kV system. To demonstrate that nature, take for instance the UA North substation shown on the map. If we were to lose this line, we've lost the ability to serve that substation. Another example, just to the right of that, the substation. If we lose that line, we've lost the ability to serve that substation. So this project will redistribute load to the existing 46 kV system, as well as provide redundancy to the looped UA North substation. So the project benefits, as I just spoke to, we can see how with the addition of this project, it has reduced the loading on the existing 46 kV system. The no contingency rating is above 100%. And also you can see how the of each substation has changed. The gray dots are actually future retirements of the 46 kV system. So in summary, the existing system, we've got several 46 kV systems with overloaded equipment, and they're serving small service territories. And with the addition of this project, we'll have the ability to retire those 46 kV substations and redistribute the load so it is served by a stronger 138 kV source. Lastly, this project will provide a looped system. It will interconnect into the 138 kV transmission system. Currently, the existing Kino substation is served off of the 138 kV system. However, it is radial. This project will bring in and connect the Kino substation to the UA North substation and terminating at the DeMoss-Petrie substation, allowing for redundancy within our system, the ability to serve a substation from 2 points. Just to note that the lines, just for demonstration purposes, it is not an approved route. So here we are at the point in the agenda. I'd like to thank everyone again for joining. This is a very important project for TEP to continue to provide safe, reliable power. This is the live stream open house for the Kino to DeMoss-Petrie 138 kV transmission line project. We do have 2 ways in which you can ask questions. The numbers are provided at the bottom of the screen. And right now, we will be moving on to the outreach efforts conducted on behalf of the project. Take it away, Renee.
Thank you, Eric. So to summarize our outreach efforts to date, we started with public official briefings in September of 2019 and held our first open house in October of 2019. We had scheduled a second public open house meeting in March of 2020, but that was canceled due to COVID. And instead, we put a project update on our webpage in April of 2020. We had a virtual open house meeting in August, and this would be our fourth public outreach with a virtual open house meeting this evening. We've also had a community working group that formed early in the process, and we had meetings starting in October of 2019. Our sixth meeting will be held next week, and we had stakeholder meetings as well, and continue to coordinate with the other stakeholders, such as other utility companies, the City of Tucson's Transportation Department, Pima County wastewater, et cetera, with emails, updates. Next slide. To date, we have had 717 comments. Actually, that's since September 25th. We've received a few comments since September 25th. We have responded to 75% of those comments, 10% for the project, being appearance, cost, health, historic districts and properties, location, undergrounding, and other is sort of a catch-all for if it doesn't fall into the other categories. And it provides the number of comments received in each of those topic categories. Of note, a commenter could have commented on multiple topics in one comment, and a commenter may have commented multiple times throughout this project.
Just to go over TEP's philosophy and design criteria again. When developing a project, TEP makes every effort to design routes that will utilize existing road right-of-way or utility corridors in an effort to minimize disturbance to surrounding areas. Underground or retire existing distribution infrastructure when the proposed transmission line shares a common alignment. And work with neighbors and other stakeholders to identify concerns and develop alternatives that are in the best interest of the community.
So in addition to TEP's philosophy, the compatibility with existing and future land use plans, residential use, historic properties and districts, sensitive receptors, room for separation from conflicting uses, view shed, cultural resources, biological resources, 100-year floodplain, the ability to construct and maintain the transmission line, and cost. And all of these factors, I'll go into more detail as we get into the analysis, but described completely in our siting study, which will be available tomorrow on TEP's website. And now we can move forward. So in addition to the public comment, we also asked the community working group to complete a survey that polled them on basically ranking those 12 criteria that I just showed in the order of importance to their neighborhoods. So what this shows is 7 neighborhood associations responded to the survey, and the top 4 concerns of each neighborhood did vary. So what's listed here are the top 4 concerns of each of those 7 neighborhoods and the total tallies from each. So we had 5 neighborhoods say that residential of that route was rebuilt, and then how we got to the final score. Moving on. So we also looked at, was the project compatible with existing and future land uses? So for the purposes of this criteria, land uses is related to zoning and land ownership. So for the project to have an impact on either of those, it would have to cause the property adjacent to it to have to be rezoned, or it would be if you had a large take of private property that might reduce its ability to be developed. We don't have anything like that for this project because the majority of it is able to be in road right-of-way. So therefore, all of the routes scored equally a 3, which is the best that they can be scored. We also looked at residential use, where in this map, it shows residential use as a black hatching. It's mentioned location. Location can be somebody saying, I don't want it in my residential street or in my neighborhood. So those kinds of comments are what go into the 84% for location. And then 71% of the community working group survey response listed residential use in the top 4. This criteria received the greatest weight in scoring with 5 times greater weight than the other criteria. So the weighted comparison scores ranged from 0.3 to 0.4% across the route combinations, with 0.3 being worse than 0.4. And the reason they're low numbers is because you took whether they scored a 3, a 2, or a 1, it reduced it down that 5-time weight. Moving on. So we also looked at impacts to historic properties and districts. This was done by a consultant who did what's called a built environment study. That study is available on TEP's project webpage under the tab or ribbon called Studies. So the factors that the consultant considered included whether or not the route bisected or bordered or both a historic district, what the street designation was, whether that be residential or a gateway route or an ancillary street, whether there were already existing power poles on that route and what the height and spacing of those poles were, whether or not there were historic light fixtures within 800 feet of the route. The reason for looking at that is that the historic light fixtures are much shorter, and therefore the difference in height historic property require traveling on the route of the transmission line as its main access point, or is it accessed from another road. And then the architectural impact. So this looked at more of the feeling of the historic district, the quality of the historic district, the age, things like that, and based on the historic preservation specialist's opinion. So 41% of public comment mention historic properties or districts, and it was in the 71 percentile for the community working group's top 4 criteria. This category received 3 times weight over the other criteria. So the weighted comparison scores ranged from 0.33 to 0.83, where 0.33 is worse than 0.83. So we also looked at sensitive receptors, and on the map you can see the sensitive receptors are categorized by the different types, and the black hatch represents the buffer, a 300-foot buffer around the property line for that sensitive receptor in their top 4 criteria, and that's of the 7 neighborhoods that responded. So this criteria received 2 times weight. The weighted comparison scores ranged from 0.5 to 1 across the 12 routes. And I want to mention again that this is all laid out in the siting study, and all of the detail we get from the scoring down to the comparison score, the weighted comparison score, are explained in the siting study in more detail. So next we looked at the room for separation from conflicting utility uses and infrastructure uses. This is the constructability analysis that's conducted by TEP's engineers and that we talked about in some detail in the last public meeting. But it basically looks at whether or not constructing the line would require moving other utilities, would require an outage on TEP lines, whether there's sufficient right-of-way, whether you can maintain a 4-foot sidewalk as required by the city of Tucson, whether you can span, things like that. So the we took the room for separation, the constructability score, and then we also looked at specific areas along the routes where there were more significant constraints. In other words, there were layered constraints. So not just having one maybe constraint like the sidewalk issue, but maybe you have the sidewalk issue plus a gas line has to be moved, plus you have to take an outage, plus you have to bury a distribution line. So as those constraints start piling up on certain segments of certain routes, those were identified and a significant constraint adjustment was made to the score. So the comparison scores ranged from 32 down to 19, and they were broken into the 3, 2, and 1 scale, and they're shown there in the table. So we also looked at visual impacts. We hired a consultant who did a visual impact assessment. That study is also available on TEP's webpage, project webpage for review under the Studies tab or Studies ribbon. The factors that they considered during their assessment included the difference between the existing and the future landscape, whether or not the route was on a gateway street, the types of viewers that were going to be viewing the route from different areas along the route, as well as the degree of impact that the transmission line would have on specific areas along the route. So for example, is there an unobstructed view in this location, and would the transmission line then obstruct the view? That's just one example of what they looked at. So 33% of public comments do mention view as a concern, and 29% of the community working group that answered the survey listed this in their top 4 criteria. This criteria did receive a 2 times weight, and the weighted comparison scores range from 1.1 to 1.26. So we also looked at cultural resources. This was done in a Class 1 survey, which is really a preliminary survey that you do that's not an on-the-ground field survey. It's done using known information about the project area. The study was completed by a consultant, and the factors that they looked at were whether the route was in a cultural sensitivity zone, what the level of cultural monitoring would be required during construction of the project, and whether there were any known cultural resource sites. This criteria received a 1-time weight. There were no public or CWG comments related to cultural resources for this project, and the comparison scores range from 2 to 3. The reason some routes received the 2 is because they are in that cultural sensitivity zone, and therefore they would require cultural monitoring during construction. So we also looked at biological resources. A consultant did prepare a biological evaluation for the project, and that is available on TEP's project webpage under the Studies tab or ribbon. The factors biologists looked at were the overall impact on the biotic community, general wildlife and vegetation, as well as potential impacts to wildlife linkages, water resources, special status species, which are threatened or endangered species or species listed as sensitive by Pima County, for example, as well as potential impacts to any riparian habitat. So 14% of the community working group listed this as one of their top 4 criteria, and this criteria was assigned a 1-time weight. The routes all scored very similarly with very little variation between them. As minimum impacts are anticipated, they all were given a score of 3.
All right, some of the other criteria we consider is the 100-year floodplain. But before I get into that, I'd like to apologize if you are experiencing technical difficulties. We ask that you refresh your web browser. This should resolve any problems that you are experiencing. We've received a number of comments currently that people are unable to hear or view. They're just getting caught up in a buffering. So if you do, should resolve the problem. But just to note as well that this meeting will be available for viewing on the project webpage within the next several days. So appreciate your patience with us as we work through these technical difficulties. And just a reminder again, this is the live stream open house for the Kino to DeMoss-Petrie 138 kV transmission line project. This is a very important project for Tucson Electric Power to continue to provide that safe, reliable power within the study area. We do have several ways in which you can ask questions. You can text in your question or speak directly to a person. And having said that, just a review of another criteria in the Phase 3 analysis is the 100-year floodplain. We evaluate all of the 100-year floodplains within the area and see if we can span the 100-year floodplain along that route. All of the routes presented, we were able to span the 100-year floodplain, so cross it. The floodplain can be placed in between poles, so each of the routes was given a score of 3. And once again, the higher the score, the better the option.
That any new access would be required for any of the routes. Therefore, all of the routes received a score of 3, and this was given a one-time weight. Lastly is cost. So cost was estimated based on the above-ground cost of $1 million a mile, which is TEP's average cost, and then an additional 10 to 30% was added to routes with more significant constraints. So Route D from Grant between Campbell and Park, as well as along that segment of Elm, Ring, and Chauncey Lane, received additional cost factor, as did routes 3 and 5, as we would have to cross Euclid multiple times in order to avoid narrow sidewalks and utilities, and Route E for the removal of the existing 46 kV line to remove that, as well as to bury all of the existing distribution and individual services along the alley. So 21% of public comments mentioned cost, and 29% of the community working group listed that in their top 4 criteria. It was given a one-time weight. So the comparison scores are broken out by below $7 million was given a score of 3, down to greater than $10 million was given a score of 1. So this table takes all of the 12 criteria on the left and lists them, and then the routes across the top, and just summarizes the scores for each of the routes in each of the criteria. We then summed the scores in 3 different ways, just to show the differences. So the first row shows the total comparison score with no weight, where the maximum score is 36 had they received a 3 in every criteria. The second row shows the total comparison score with the factors that were weighted. And then the last row shows just the 4 criteria that received weight. So those were the criteria that had the most comments and the most concern throughout the project, which were residential, views, historic properties and districts, and sensitive receptors. So we kind of broke them in their natural breaking points, where green are the higher scoring routes, orange are in the middle, and red are the lower scoring routes in each of those rows. So as a result of that analysis, as well as which the public comments and the CWG serve into deciding the weights for each of those criteria factors, the Phase 3 analysis resulted in the reduction from the 12 route combinations that we started with to 6 preliminary routes. The route combinations removed are 1E and 2E, 3A and 3B, 5A and 5B, and the routes that are still under consideration are 1A, B, and D, and 2A, 2B, and 2D. You're up, Ed.
Just like to state again our sincere apologies. The internet this evening is having some challenges in the Tucson community, which is beyond our control. We do apologize for that and ask for your patience. And if need be, we can even reschedule this to get that information out there. But this meeting will be available on the project website for viewing at a later date. And you will have the ability to comment, and we will respond to those comments throughout the whole process as well. So just please be patient with us, and thank you for that consideration. So
keep trying to refresh your browser.
Yeah, and yes, just again, please refresh your browser. That might help get things moving in again, stopping the buffering. If while you're watching your screen freezes, continue to refresh your browser. So we do have a scheduled break in here, and maybe this is a good time to break. It'll give us a few minutes and give everyone the opportunity. Not now, I'm told. So never mind that. The internet's working good apparently. So
we'll keep going.
At 7 p.m. Okay, so continuing on then. As Renee had just went over the Phase 3 analysis, we'll be moving forward. We've eliminated 6 preliminary routes for consideration, and we'll be moving forward with 6 preliminary routes for comment and consideration by the public. So as you can see here, just an overview of all of the routes presented. And just moving on, so what we have here is Route 1A, and so the number goes from the Kino substation to the proposed UA substation, and the letter goes from the UA substation to the existing DeMoss-Petrie substation. This route goes from Kino up through Campbell and turns west on Elm and Ring, where it terminates into the planned UA substation. From there, it exits and heads north on Vine to Grant, and then continues west onto Grant, where it terminates at the existing DeMoss-Petrie substation. So the next route for consideration, segment 1 is the same as the previous route, but we have 1B. So starting at the planned UA North substation, we'll be traveling west in the alleyway where the existing 46 kV is, and we'll be heading north on Park, traveling west onto Grant to the existing DeMoss-Petrie substation. Very similar again with 1, with the exception this is 1D. So the D portion, we are able to, and from the comments we've received, we investigated the possibility of this a little further, as Renee had spoken to. We are able to put 2 single circuits on either side of the roadway, leaving Elm. So from there we will head west on Elm, north on Campbell to Grant, and then west on Grant to the existing DeMoss-Petrie substation. And here we have Route 2A, very similar to Route 1A. The only difference is that rather than traveling on Kino, we'll be traveling north on Campbell and crossing Aviation, and everything from there is the same as Route 1A. In similar fashion with Route 2B, the only difference being more traveling on Campbell rather than Kino. And similar fashion with Route 2D. And similar, and that is it. And now the project timeline. I think that went faster than you thought, Renee. You're up.
All right. So the timeline has not changed much since the last time we met. The main thing is that the application we had intended to submit to the CEC application in November, and that is actually going to move to the first week in December. But otherwise, the CEC hearing is still anticipated in January of 2021 with an ACC decision in March of 2021. And construction is still anticipated to start in the beginning of 2022